There's a lot of things to report, most of them pretty sad. In Gaza, the Israeli assault and blockade of the northern part of the Gaza Strip continues. Um, every day, dozens or scores of people, mostly women and children, civilians, are killed. It's estimated that more than 1,200 people have been killed in northern Gaza alone in the last 3 weeks. And I recognize, certainly I feel, that these statistics are sometimes numbing, and it's hard to get a grasp on one's feelings. And sometimes it's useful to focus on one thing rather than all the horrors that are happening. And for me, this week it relates to the Kamal Adwan hospital in Beit Lahia that was attacked by the Israeli army. All the staff was arrested and detained. Most of the hospital damaged or destroyed. And one of the few surviving doctors, when he returned to the hospital, he found the body of his dead child, Ibrahim. And there's a video around that is incredibly moving of Dr. Hussam leading the funeral for his son. And I put the link to it in the chat. And if anyone wants to get in touch with their emotions by watching that, I recommend it. I've seen it maybe half a dozen times just today, and it continues to be incredibly moving. Israel also has banned the entry into Gaza of a number of medical NGOs, including the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, which was one of the focuses of the local Palestinian community in annual fundraising events. And of course, this will again limit, resources to medical help among the thousands of wounded, hungry, starving people in northern Gaza. In Lebanon, Israel has continued to demolish Lebanese villages and towns right at the border. They have not been able to enter very deeply into Lebanon, and when they have, they've suffered significant casualties. They also have announced just today, I believe, that they were going to start bombing Baalbek, a huge world historic site in the Bekaa Valley, which is very far from the border of Israel. And again, another war crime and potentially to destroy, one of the greatest monuments from antiquity in the world. Israel has suffered a lot of casualties in Lebanon, especially in the last week or two. And there's talk now among their own military leadership that maybe they should declare victory in Lebanon and stop entering their soldiers there. Their end game apparently is to turn southern Lebanon into a kind of Gaza by flattening all the towns and villages and not allowing the residents to return, and therefore creating a kind of free fire zone near their own border. I doubt if this will work. And Hezbollah continues to fire rockets into Israel on a daily basis. But it's significant that some of their military leadership and their American supporters are saying that, enough is enough and Israel should declare victory both in the north and in Gaza and cease its large-scale military operations. To me, this is a sign of Israeli defeat rather than victory. You all know Israel launched an attack against Iran a few days ago. Apparently, it was more limited than was expected, either as a result of U.S. arm twisting, which was the U.S. administration very much did not like to see a large-scale outbreak of regional war in the Middle East just before the election, or because Israel did not have the capability to do more damage to Iran. in Israel itself. And of course, we don't know what the Iranians are going to do and whether this is going to spiral further. The U.S. is clearly trying to avoid that. And interestingly, the U.S. allies, the U.S. Sunni Muslim oil monarchies in the Persian Gulf, have condemned the Israeli attack on Iran, including Saudi Arabia, which is interesting. So the U.S. is definitely in a situation of trying to placate different interests in the Middle East, and would like to see this war wind down if they could. In Israel itself, the Knesset passed 2 bills to outlaw UNRWA from operating within Israeli-controlled territories. They said within Israel, but of course they mean within Israel and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which are not recognized as Israeli territories under international law. And just so you know, UNRWA is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency that was set up in 1949 to administer to the refugees that were created by Israel's war against the Palestinians. And it has been a public enemy number one for Israel ever since, because it's an agency that specifically maintains the Palestinian identity of refugees, now a generation or two after they were expelled from Israel. And it already closed down the UNRWA office in Jerusalem. And surprisingly or not, its actions have been widely condemned around the world by many countries, including the U.S. State Department, somewhat surprisingly. UNRWA is absolutely critical in maintaining the sort of daily life and infrastructure and getting relief supplies to Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, and there is no easy substitute. And so banning or trying to ban UNRWA is another aspect of Israel's aim to sort of starve Palestinians into non-existence. They also passed in the Knesset a day or two ago a law that would make it easier to ban Arab Palestinian parties from running for election in the Knesset. Again, another move toward removing whatever fragments of democracy seem to people believe in Israel. It already has some laws limiting what opposition parties can say or advocate, but this is another step that would possibly ban Arab parties altogether. And by the way, I mentioned last week that Trump is very popular in Israel. 66% of Israeli Jews support him. And opinion polls also indicate that the more Netanyahu has attacked Lebanon and Gaza, the more popular he has become. He was very unpopular on the eve of this war, and he's gained in popularity the more Palestinians that he kills. And by the way, the U.S. State Department, it's been revealed, has basically refused to investigate internal charges that Israel has abused international and U.S. law in withholding humanitarian aid to Gaza. This has come up frequently. There are employees within the State Department that do care about U.S. law and international law, and they are being stifled, and none of their investigations are being pursued. And as a further indication of how isolated the U.S. is becoming in the world, in good part because of its support for Israel, the UN General Assembly passed its annual condemnation of the U.S. blockade against Cuba, and the vote was 187-2. The only negative votes were the U.S. and Israel. Israel's making a gesture to show that they're useful somehow to the United States diplomatically. In Congress, there was a bill that's already been submitted in the House and another one on the verge of being submitted in the Senate that would defund the UN if it takes any steps to isolate or downplay Israel's participation. And this is even more possible now with Israel's outlawing of UNRWA. It's a violation of the U.S. the UN resolution that created UNRWA, and that has been again repeated annually, that advocates under international law for the return of Palestinians-made refugees in 1947 to 49. And that will be in the Senate. And there's also a report that Senate Majority Leader Schumer is going to finally take up the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which includes adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, that is, calling criticism of Israel anti-Semitic, and that he's expected to add this as a rider to the annual Pentagon budget bill, which of course will have to pass, and that will mean the debate will be limited because it will be an amendment to that bill rather than a separate bill. And by the way, some of you may have seen Texas, among many states, has adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and a federal judge in Texas ruled that it was unconstitutional limits on free speech. And that, that was a kind of legal victory about this. And where that'll go in the future, if it's adopted by the Congress, unfortunately, this Supreme Court is very unlikely to strike it down. And finally, for people looking at, well, I should mention, we're all aware of the case of genocide, the charge of genocide before the International Court of Justice. South Africa submitted its evidence, a massive amount of evidence for the hearings on this. The final decision may take quite a while, and they submitted a dossier of many thousands of pages of evidence. And by the way, if you want to follow some of the evidence for what Israel is doing in Gaza, an organization called Forensic Architecture, which has been used by the New York Times and other mainstream news sources for analyzing visual and graphic information, they published a dossier called The Cartography of Genocide, and are not pulling any punches about that. And I'll put that in the chat also.
Oh.
Finally, I wanted to mention that for those of us who were hoping for possibly a Senator Presley, or fearing the possibility of a Senator Auchincloss, Markey has announced that he's running for re-election in 2 years, which is kind of a surprise and a disappointment. Whether that could change or not, we don't know, but that's bad news depending on what angle you're looking at it. Bad news for us or bad news for the supporters of Israel. Markey is, middle of the road on that. Could be worse, could be better. So that's all I have right now. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Let's open it up to questions. Noble, go ahead.
Well, I don't really have a question, but I think Markey running again actually might be a good thing. I'd rather have him in for another 6 years than Auchincloss in for the next 30 years.
Yes.
So,
Well, but the other possibility was Presley for the next 30 years, which definitely would be a step up. But
that'd be great, yeah. But yeah.
Abby and then Paul.
I just want to let you know that I had invited the folks from Forensic Architecture to do a webinar for us. That was like 6 or 7 months ago. They originally said yes. I think they've been so very busy, it's hard to get a hold of them, but it would be great if we could get them.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know really who is behind that organization exactly, but they have done good work.
It's Eyal Weizman, who was the son of, was that his name? Who was the head of the Air Force in Israel?
Mm-hmm.
He's now, he's British Israeli. He's just way too busy to come, but they have other folks who could do a webinar for us.
Among other things, earlier in the war, they were the organization that debunked the Israeli claims that the Palestinians bombed their own hospital. And their report was published in the New York Times, although it's then been buried. The Israelis still claim that the Palestinians shot a missile at their own hospital, but they do good work.
Paul.
Jeff, a question about UNRWA. Hasn't the U.S. Congress has banned the U.S. from providing aid to UNRWA? Is that correct?
For, I forget when it ends, for a period of time, I think a year from when it passed. So it goes into next year sometime. And there's a bill in Congress that I think maybe McGovern was the lead on. I can't remember, but to restore UNRWA funding. And it was co-sponsored by McGovern, Presley, Lynch, Trahan, maybe somebody else too. I can't remember, but that was a step for Trahan anyway, who's been kind of pretty absent from this issue. And whether that'll go anywhere, who knows?
Oh, man.
It has about 60 Democratic co-sponsors, which is, pretty decent.
So the U.S. is officially criticizing Israel for what it's doing to UNRWA at the same time that it has cut off our own aid to UNRWA.
And you may know that Israel charged that there were some number of UNRWA employees that either support Hamas or even participated in the October 7th attack. And they've never provided any proof of this. And even if it's true, UNRWA has 12 or 13,000 employees in Gaza. It would be very surprising if there weren't some of them that were supporters of Hamas, for example. So that doesn't say anything about the organization as a whole, which is crucial. What Israel doesn't like is that it preserves the sense of national identity of Palestinians as opposed to just being generic refugees. And they hate that.
Yeah.
Dan.
Hey, Jeff, thanks. Would you care to spend a minute talking a little bit about the letter you sent to the Dot reporter about lobbyists and trips to Israel?
Well, that was a column, and it was actually more than a year ago, relating to the bill that was in the state legislature then, which didn't pass.
Oh, okay.
And I just sent it as an example. For some of you who are fairly new to MAPPA, you may not be aware that this has been an effort that we've made over the last couple of legislators, because we think, as that article about AIPAC trips, these propaganda trips are an important tool for the Israel lobby in terms of, getting support and, and influence among legislators and other public leaders. And of course, they're corrupt. It's even if it weren't about Israel, the idea that a lobbying organization can spend thousands of dollars on trips, deluxe trips for people, and then not get some kind of friendlier reception when they propose legislation, of course, is absurd. This is corrupt lobbying, and it's pretty much embedded in our system. It's not only AIPAC that does it, but AIPAC is among the biggest users of this, especially the travel part. So maybe, if there's enough interest, maybe we'll try to submit this bill again in the future. I mean, it certainly makes sense in terms of good government, even beyond the issue of Israel and Palestine. It is a form of corruption in government.
Let's go to Claire.
Hi, I wanted to ask Jeff if he watched an interview on Amanpour last night between former Prime Minister Olmert and a Palestinian official, and it offered. They were talking about ending the necessity of ending the war and opposing Netanyahu. So, I mean, it was like a breath of fresh air for about 2 minutes, and so I was curious to know what Olmert. I don't know whether is that correct pronunciation. Where his politics are at the moment and how much influence he has.
He's a former prime minister of Israel who was indicted for corruption
some
years ago, and kind of a critic. He's a centrist, more or less, but a critic of Netanyahu lately. And again, there are signs that there are important, influential people that want to bring this war, the current phase of the war, to an end. Because it's damaging the United States and maybe damaging Israel in the longer run and certainly killing a lot of Israeli soldiers. So, that's a sign, there's that sector within Israel that is not pro-Palestinian, but is anti-Netanyahu. But it's a shrinking part of Israel. Netanyahu is more and more popular these days.
Well, what was impressive is that he was working directly with this Palestinian official, so.
Any other questions for Jeff? All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, as always, for these updates.